Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site, also money1776.com, a free site, and always1776.com, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, I'm not here trying to change anybody. Right? I want people to understand that I read comments to the videos. I understand the group that I have here online organically is extremely diverse. Right? I recognize that I have progressives like my family. My dad was a social worker as part of my audience. I understand I have some MAGA folks, hardcore free market type folks, libertarian folks. I tend to vote libertarian in presidential elections, right? I understand that the gambling community is diverse. I picked this background for this video for a reason, right? It's because the gambling community is diverse. The gambling community is results oriented. In other words, I put capital at risk on a bet. I want a return, right? My goal is to make money gambling, right? So as you can imagine, you have a lot of groups here coming together with that goal to make money, to profit off bets, to profit off betting information, right? And they've all come together. Just understand, that's unique in terms of social commentary these days, right? I'm not here trying to change anyone. I'm not here trying to say to you, hey, you're wrong. You need to change your views. You need to agree with my views. What I'm simply doing here is sharing my views with you, just like I do on fights, right? Or on sports events, right? I'm just giving a perspective in furtherance of the dialogue. Now, whenever I mention DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, right? I'll get comments in the video, even if it's a passing reference. I'll get comments in the video where people will say, hey, don't you believe in a meritocracy? Right? Folks want to discuss the issue. They want to be heard. I try not to censor the comment section, right? Just to be blunt, sometimes I have to. I even have my own special group of stalkers, right? Sometimes the comments are, racial slurs. I'll censor those every time, right? Other times, I also talk crypto. Someone is stalking me right now. You may have seen them in, the comment section. I just let those comments stand where they say, hey, I've, lost my crypto in a corrupt wallet. I can't access it. Here is my, secret code and stuff like that. I'm not sure what their game is, but just understand you have people trying to game the system out there, right? Leaving, I guess it's some form of political commentary in the comment section. I try not to censor, just understand that I feel that good ideas will establish themselves, will find their own support. Bad ideas will die on the vine, right? That's what an open exchange is all about, right? I'm very much a free speech person. So let's talk about DEI. I'm just going to give you my view first in terms of just general philosophy, in terms of economics. I'm one of those who believes you're either an owner or a temp, right? You're either someone who owns the business you're in, or you are a temporary employee. Right? You see people, they're on top, you know, they might be news anchors, etc., celebrities, and then you realize that there's a rate of attrition, there's a rate of turnover because the person, even if they're good at what they do, doesn't own the business, right? I need for people, as they look at the DEI dialogue, to understand that the perspectives are different, right? Temps really buy into this meritocracy idea a lot more than owners, right? They really want to believe that they're being judged on the same criteria. They believe that the world is a scarce world and that, you know, there's something called being most qualified for the position. They're living in, from my perspective, an alternate reality where the people who are successful around them are all the smartest person in the room, the best at what they do in the world, right? When they walk into a restaurant, they must believe that that restaurant owner is the sharpest entrepreneur in the restaurant business in that part of town, right? If that's what motivates you, great. Understand, too, all of these arguments about what the government should fund. Should the government have programs that promote people from different cultural backgrounds, different genders, etc., right? Let me break some shocking news to that crowd. The government is not the only capital source in the economy. Right? Understand, there's an entire economy that's separate and distinct from government programs. Right? If you own a business, you understand this well. Right? Now let me make some points. I personally don't care most of the time what government programs are out there trying to promote, you know, different cultural ideas, right? Understand, I'm just trying to make a profit off markets, right? Whatever I'm involved in. Again, I'm just trying to make a profit off markets, right? Administrations come and go, believe it or not. What the government says today might not be gospel tomorrow, right? The government used to believe in separate but equal, right? Folks, you need to take these government philosophies with a grain of salt. I know it sounds ridiculous, but understand, these politicians are self-interested. They're just trying to get power. They're just trying to convince voters, right? The voters themselves might have hang-ups, so the people they elect might have hang-ups. You can't rely on government. You can't rely on government programs, right? Just food for thought, right? I'm much more interested in the private sector than I am the government sector, right? Government is trying to juice numbers so they can make a case to get votes to stay in power. Government has its own agenda. Whatever ideology that they're trying to spread, right, you know, is just one of convenience. If they need cheap labor, they're going to try to do things like, you know, try to convince some group that they aren't smart enough to be anything other than cheap labor. Right? All of these, you know, racial superiority ideas are just an effort to game a market. Right? Now, again, this is my video. These are my views. You believe what you want. I'm just sharing one side of the ledger here. Right? So when I look back and I see slavery, folks, as I see it, that's just labor exploitation. They're looking for a cheap labor source. Right? Understand too, when I say slavery, I'm not even limiting it to American slavery, because there's been slavery all over the globe. Right? People looking to get an edge in a market that involves capital and rates of return, they need to marginalize some groups. It's just that simple. They need to come up with rules where you say, hey, you can't vote. You can't own property. In fact, you are property. Right? The truth is different. But understand, they need this political construct so that they have a cheap labor source. Let me go further. Right? I need for folks to understand that even the argument of DEI is extremely dated, because now you have something called AI. In fact, before AI, you had the internet. Understand, everyone now and going forward is going to have inexpensive access to PhD level information. Right now, I don't need the genius on the team. Now I just need access to AI so I can figure out the laws, so I can set up a legal business. Right? So I can get answers to my questions. So I can have, if not a well-versed actual advisor, I can have a cheap, inexpensive, artificial intelligence-driven driver. Right? I don't have to pay someone who has a Harvard degree, right, and will pretend, and I'm sure that people from schools like Harvard, Princeton, Brown, MIT, Berkeley, Stanford, University of Texas, University of Chicago, who might come across one of my videos from time to time, they know that when you graduate from one of those great institutions with a bachelor's degree, you're mostly clueless, like most of us. Right? In other words, I hire a Harvard grad. That doesn't mean that Harvard grad knows exactly how I should structure my business in Northern California to maximize my chance of making profits. Right? That Harvard degree, that bachelor's, doesn't give the person innate superiority over the rest of the economy. Might not give them any superiority over the rest of the economy in figuring out how to recruit great talent, how to work with people, master interpersonal relationships, including relationships with the greater community and potential customers. Right? So just understand, now you have the information. It's online. It's in front of you. Right? You can get to that information quickly by doing searches, whether Google searches or AI searches, or both, Google Gemini. Right? The information is out there. If I need to calculate numbers, I don't need to hire an employee who's good at numbers. Right? I just need to figure out how to input the numbers in an Excel spreadsheet. I just need to figure out the software that I can buy that can give me the numbers I need to know. Right? So let me point out, owners understand this. I believe most entrepreneurs understand that rather than innate superiority, sometimes the difference between success and failure comes down to being in the right place at the right time. Right? Let me tell you, I did not even have a shirt on. I was wearing a t-shirt. Right? I had some friends. There was a fight coming up. I believe it was Cotto Margarito. And I needed a way to record my pick. I also wanted to encourage people to respond so that I could meet some fellow gamblers here online. Right? So that we could discuss sports picks. I thought, hey, let me try to come up with a small sports community. Right? So on my sofa, and by the way, that's where really most of the videos, the first year I was here on YouTube, were made from. Right? On my sofa, I just talked about Cotto Margarito. I don't even think I said much. I think I said, hey, I think Antonio Margarito wins this fight. Right, folks? Was not thoroughly prepared at all. Right? Suddenly a crowd started, responding to the video. Suddenly people wanted another video. Right, folks? I just happened to be a guy in the right place at the right time. Right? I didn't have to be some graduate of a fancy school, although I've lived that life. Right? I didn't have to be anyone other than someone talking boxing and giving perspectives. That's the way many successful businesses get started. Right? I wasn't even trying to start a business. So I need for folks to understand, as you watch shows like Shark Tank, I know he stepped away from the show, but Mark Cuban talks about how he was fired early on, how he was floundering, how he had to give an early customer a break, how he had to say, look, how he was undercapitalized, how he gets fired. He's talking to a customer and he says to the customer, look, if you come with me, I'll give you these price breaks. If you put the capital up early, because I don't have the infrastructure as a business yet, we can structure the deal this way so I could deliver value to you. Right? Barbara Corcoran was a secretary. She didn't even think about being a realtor. She was a secretary. Then she saw how the game was played and she thought, you know what? I could do what that person's doing. So then she starts studying markets. Folks, look at the backstories of the people on Shark Tank. That's how some successful people have gotten started in business. Right? This meritocracy myth where, we're all running a race, and if I can hit the tape 1/100th of a second before you, then I'm entitled to these jobs, this success, this position. Right, folks? I need for people to understand that that's just one extremely small part of the market. So let me just say this. Right? If you invest in stock, and I understand many people don't, right, you'll find out that, some people with the best ideas, right, some mathematical types who, have been feted, won awards in their fields, who've won things like Nobel Prizes, might be less successful investors than the guy who hears about Bitcoin from a friend, doesn't quite know how it works, but understands it's a limited supply, right? Might hear buzz from other people, might then start thinking to themselves, you know what? On a lark, on a speculation, let me just buy some Bitcoin here. It's cheap, right? It's selling for less than $100. Might then figure out that there's a community, that they're digital wallets, right? That person who stumbles into a transformative technology or a stock, right, might end up being a better investor than, some hedge fund of Nobel Prize winners, right? Understand, we know this because our government bailed out outfits that had Nobel Prize winners who were too leveraged, who had the market blow up on them. Right? So, to me, the DEI argument is misguided. People are putting a lot of weight into this whole DEI dialogue that really, shouldn't be there. Let's talk about the other side of the equation. I've had different people work for me. Just understand that if I'm talking to someone, I'm making a decision based on how well I think they're going to do in the job. Now, before I go down this road, let me take a step back here. Right now, let's say, just hypothetically, that I decide I'm going to have a website that does a newscast, right, for niche markets, right? We're calling it a niche market. In my opinion, a market's a market, right? A market that I can profit from. Now, again, I'm not trying to do anyone any favors. I'm trying to make a profit. Now, news sources with AI, I can just ask AI for the top stories of the day, and they'll spit out stories, right? I can even go further. I can ask for the top stories of the day concerning certain subject matter, right? It could be a stock. It could be a stock sector. It could be restaurants in San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, right? Your part of town, right? Could be anything. Now, understand, what advertisers am I targeting? Right? And again, we're just being capitalists. Right? I'm not, I'm just trying to make money. What I want people to understand is if I decide that I'm going to target Asian advertisers, right? I see a market that can make money, right? Some website devoted to Asian news, parts of Asian culture, Asian merchants, Asian markets, Asian stocks, right? I need someone who's going to be able to connect the station to those markets and those advertisers, right? So I might want someone who was raised in an Asian community. I might want someone who is fluid reading and speaking Mandarin, right? I might want someone with those skills, right? Now, just understand, if I'm operating, and this matters, no one ever thinks about it when they're talking DEI. If I'm operating on a budget, if I can't pay top dollar, in other words, I want to find someone who's going to connect me to a certain group of advertisers at a certain price point, then I'm not looking for the person who, is the best ever. the best ever in that. I might hire someone who, for whatever reason, is available, right? I can't bid against a current employer. I can't even pay market price. So I might be looking to hire someone who is unemployed, who I feel is going to connect me with the advertisers who are going to be my real customers, right? So just understand, in that setting, race matters. Cultural background matters, right? Wealth matters. Folks, I'm just keeping it real here, right? If my target market is an African American market, right, all of that matters. You might just happen to be the person who was raised in an African American community, who has been deeply involved in African American culture. Right now, understand, if you're white, if you're a Latino, but I feel you're someone who connects, right? Tina Marie, right? Or Fergie, right? Someone who connects with the advertisers who I'm trying to attract as customers. And if you're willing to work for what I'm offering to pay, right? Maybe you're savvy with it. Maybe you come in and you're startup oriented and you're willing to get an equity stake in part for your compensation. You're going to have an advantage with me, the person hiring, that someone from Stanford, Berkeley, UCLA won't have. Right? For me, your degree is less important, if you have a degree, than it is your ability to connect to the advertisers I'm trying to recruit. So let's get back to the job I'm hiring for. The job might have a gender component, right? When I got divorced, I wanted a female lawyer. In the unlikely event that issues related to property division would make it to trial, right? I knew my wife could cry at the drop of a hat. So I thought, you know what? I don't want some man roughing her up on the stand, right? I want a female attorney who is gonna appear empathetic, but who would be tough and who would protect my financial interests, right? So as you can imagine, I thought, who do I know like that? Now, it just so happened that I had a drinking buddy at the time who met those needs, right? But understand, make no mistake about it. And I wasn't, trying to be sexist or anything like that, but I wanted a female attorney. Let me point out, too, that sometimes hiring has a racial component, right? An older white guy hired me to be his attorney. I thought, wow, this is interesting. The whole time we're talking and stuff like that, I thought, wow, what attracted him to my firm? Then, of course, I met his spouse, soon-to-be ex-wife, and she was of a different race than he was, right? She wasn't even black, but I could tell he was trying to convey a certain image in court, right? Certainly, if I'm involved in a legal matter and, it's going to go to a jury trial in, let's say, Oakland, right, where I think there might be some people of color on the jury, if I were hiring an attorney, I would say, well, I want an attorney who can connect with that crowd, right? Understand, let's be upfront here. Oakland, more diverse than you think, right? Jerry Brown was the mayor of Oakland for a stretch, right? But understand, I want someone who's going to connect with that crowd, right? Resumes from people who have gone to great universities, who have great board scores, aren't going to matter to me as much as the person is able to connect with that crowd. Understand, too, the position might require cultural fluidity, right? We've all been the minority, right? You don't have to be black to be a minority. You could be a white guy hanging in a black neighborhood and sense that there's some social tension, social awkwardness, right, toward you just based on appearance. We've all been the person who is the fish out of water, so to speak, right? And we've all encountered people from different paths who, you realize, oh, they see me as just a black person. Right? They have no idea about any other part of my existence. Right? They see me as a black person. You realize when you're in crowds that aren't what I call culturally fluid. Right? Sometimes there are positions that require cultural fluidity. Whatever the government is saying, whatever position the government's taking, etc., just understand that, there are different sides to arguments, right? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Now, in situations where I need cultural fluidity, I'm going to need someone who's culturally fluid. There was a time, if you're old enough, you remember it, where many people considered Bill Clinton to be America's first black president. Right? Clinton, whatever you think about Bill, whatever mistakes he's made, right? And you can be a great leader while having your own personal flaws. Whatever mistakes Bill Clinton made, you just got the feeling that Bill Clinton was, someone who could have dinner with a black family. Then the next day, have dinner with a Latino family. Then the next day, have dinner with a Jewish family. Right? He was culturally fluid. Great communicator. Right? So you were hearing about all these other problems that Bill had. But you thought to yourself, you know what? If I need cultural fluidity, this is the guy. Go back through American history, you're going to find out that at one point, Ralph Bunche was the American representative at the United Nations, right? And what I love with Bunche, I go back and look at old films, is the guy's culturally fluid. Right now, again, folks, my goal is to make money. Understand the jobs you're hiring for determine who you hire. Understand, too, the government can have certain government policies on where federal, funding is going to go. There are times where you're far away from that because that's a small part of the economy. Right? In the private sector, I don't want government oversight, that level of government oversight that comes with government being an investor in my business. So just understand, the same way when you are watching TV and you turn on Saturday Night Live and you appreciate the cultural diversity of that cast, right? The same way it would be disappointing if you turned on Saturday Night Live and it were just a white Gentile cast and they were afraid to touch hot third-rail issues like being Jewish in New York City, being Palestinian in New York City, being an undocumented Jamaican in New York City, right? you wouldn't be able to hear jokes like that with the same kind of resonance that you can with a diverse cast. My point is simply, there's a market, there's a demand side for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Folks, at my age, I'm only interested in being an owner. Right? Understand, if I'm going to be involved in a venture and I look around the room and I think, oh, gee, I'm the only black guy here. Right? That venture's not going to be attractive to me. If I look around the room and I hear that I'm getting a salary, not some kind of equity interest, that venture's not going to be interesting to me. Right? There's a group out there that expects diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right? If I go to a local restaurant and I don't see a single person of color, folks, chances are I'm going to leave. Right? Why? Because in a free market, there are better options for me. Right? So the entire DEI argument really ignores the demand side completely. Worse yet, it ignores the economic reality. If I'm in Manhattan and, I'm looking for a realtor, right? I'm going to think to myself, you know what? I need a realtor who's going to be thinking about things I might not even think about. Right? It's like, look, this co-op, right? I want the realtor who's going to answer questions I haven't even formed yet. Right? So, let's say it's a co-op. Let's say I have to vote on things. There's a board. And I want to know, gee, is this board tilted against women and minorities? Right? Hell, if I'm spending my money, I deserve to know that before I spend a cent, before I make any financial commitment. Right? So if I find a great female realtor, right? Better yet, if I find a female realtor who's a person of color, right, then we can have the conversation. Right? It's a different conversation than I would have with a white realtor from Greenwich, Connecticut. Right? So I find the realtor. We're talking, and, the realtor's telling me that, yeah, I live in, some diverse neighborhood. Right? Or I used to live in Harlem, and we talk a little bit, and I say, oh, this realtor has it going on. She understands that I want my family someplace comfortable. She gets it. Right? Then she can tell me, we can have a conversation. I could say things like, hey, how receptive is the co-op board to minority applicants? Right? We can have that conversation. Right? Understand, I'm a black male. That matters to me. Right? Let me say this too. Let's say I have the great white realtor. Right? And they're, they're great. But just understand, that white realtor may have dealt with predominantly white applicants. Right? That white realtor might not even have asked themselves questions that I need the answers for as a black applicant. Right? So let's just say, to close this, I have much more faith in markets. Much more faith in markets than I do politicians. Right? Our government at different times has told us the most ridiculous things. right? We had a recent president who was supposed to be a progressive, but yet he was against gay marriage. I mean, all I'm saying is I'm not going to wait for government to figure out the lay of the land, right? You know, separate but equal. Does anyone think that separate but equal was ever separate but equal? I don't. Right? I look at the history books and I'm like, okay, this is the propaganda they were selling at the time. That's really what it comes down to. Right? I'm not beholden to government DEI policies. Right? What matters to me is when I'm thinking about making a move. You know, and I'm just, you know, one small business owner, but I'm thinking about making a move into a market. And I'm thinking about the advertisers that I want to attract, the customers that I want to attract. I see an opportunity, right, to move into, let's say, a Latino market. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm in East LA. I want the people to feel comfortable in the restaurant. Right? What's going to make them feel comfortable? That's my top priority. Right? It's not someone's, you know, transcript from some school that doesn't have DEI where I don't even know if they were around people of color during their college career. Let me point out, too, that the demand side really determines everything. If I were to make a contribution to my alma mater, right, which I've done in the past, right, and if I'm given the opportunity to have that contribution be applied to people from my background, right, someone from my neighborhood, right, you know, hell, I was lucky in the past. I want other people from my neighborhood to be lucky. I'm going to check that box. I'm going to do what I can to help them. Right? Just understand, folks, that market exists, whether or not the government has some DEI policy in place. So what's happened now is that private companies have jumped the fence. They've been caught up in all this anti-DEI stuff, right? And, you know, I'm an immigrant just like Elon Musk. I know Elon Musk sees things differently than I do. Okay, good for him, right? But just understand, if those private businesses have customer bases with expectations like I have, in other words, again, I'm the black person who walks in the restaurant, looks around, I don't see any black workers there. I don't see, you know, black customers there, right? I'm going to think to myself, gee, are there any entrepreneurs in this part of town who are a bit more inclusive than this restaurant? Folks, the market's going to take over. Those entrepreneurs are going to realize that all this anti-DEI fervor has opened the door to a market opportunity of more inclusion, right? The market equilibrium is not going to stop at anti-DEI. It's going to move to a different equilibrium. It might even be, you know, a different sector of the market where entrepreneurs are actually trying their best to meet the needs of customers, including women and people of color. Those are my thoughts. Don't ignore the demand side. It exists. Don't ignore the right time, right place. Right? You're kidding yourself if you think the only successful people in life are people with high SAT scores. Right? By the way, you'd be shocked. People with high SAT scores come in all colors. Right? Just food for thought, right? The assumption shouldn't be that the black guy at the dorm is some beneficiary of some DEI program. Anyway, those are my thoughts this Sunday morning, April the 13th, 2025. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let's also be adult here, right? I don't want people to suddenly be afraid of my site because my site's willing to discuss controversial issues and offer views that might not be mainstream views, right? I want the opposite approach, right? If you're here for sports, be here for sports, right? If you're here for high-risk economic update videos, be here for high-risk economic update videos, right? I don't know Shohei Ohtani's political beliefs. He's a great baseball player. I love watching him play, right? I don't have to agree with an athlete or an actor in everything they believe to enjoy their work. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comments section of this YouTube video. If you take away one thing from this video, let it be the idea that you're either an owner or a temp. Thanks for stopping by.